I want to welcome everybody to this webinar on Alaska's next economy. We're so glad you've joined us to learn more about a vision to build a thriving regenerative economy for the future. I am calling in from the homelands of the Dena'ina people, now known as Anchorage. We ask you to take this moment to thank the traditional and current stewards of the lands you call home. Across Alaska and this continent, our natural spaces have only been preserved because of the ancestral imperative, the cultural beauty, and the determined commitment of Indigenous peoples. It is thanks to their caretaking, knowledge, stories, languages, and generosity that we are able to build relationships with these lands today. We express our gratitude that these lands and waters have been guarded and protected for millennia. And as we all enjoy and are nourished by these lands and waters today, we must also commit to their protection and work to preserve their health and wealth for generations to come. In this webinar, we're going to look at 6 topics that contribute to a regenerative economy. These topics are explored in the Thriving Alaska Pathways to a Prosperous Future, your guide to vital topics shaping the fall 2022 election. That is a mouthful. That was published last month, sponsored by the Alaska Climate Alliance Regenerative Economies Working Group. We will define what a regenerative economy is and briefly discuss what Alaska's economy could look like by pursuing forward-looking opportunities, including renewable energy, broadband access, tourism and outdoor recreation, agriculture and mariculture, education and workforce development, as well as green hydrogen production. So many things. Then we'll hear from a distinguished panel of local experts discussing key strategies in these areas for creating a thriving economy. We'll also view together 2 inspiring short films on Native-led initiatives in mariculture and broadband access. We'll conclude by taking a look at some of the upcoming action opportunities and ways to get involved with our collaborative Regenerative Economies Coalition. I would like to acknowledge our co-host for this webinar, Alaska Climate Alliance, Alaskans Take a Stand, AKPIRG, AKV3, Launch Alaska, Native Movement, Pacific Environment, let me make sure I get that right, Stand Up Alaska, International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers, IBEW, 1547, Union Strong, The Boardroom, the Just Transition Collective, the International Council on Clean Transportation, and last but not least, the Fairbanks Climate Action Coalition. And before we get started with our program, there are just a few logistics. Please rename yourself with pronouns and organizations if you like, and you will be able to chat your questions to Hallie Reed in the chat. And this webinar is being recorded and will be posted after the event on our website, aknexteconomy.com, where you can also find our report, Thriving Alaska Pathways to a Prosperous Future. Now, I would like to introduce an Alaskan icon. Kay Brown is Arctic Policy Director for Pacific Environment, and she's one of the principal authors of our report, Thriving Alaska Pathways to a Prosperous Future. Kay is a former state legislator and a former director of oil and gas for the state of Alaska. Kay is also my good trouble partner on the steering committee of Alaska Women's Ascend and a dear friend. She's going to present some highlights from the report.
Thank you, Erin. And thanks everyone for joining us. It's really great to see you all here on Zoom. And a key takeaway from this report and from the work we've been doing is that Alaska can have a prosperous regenerative economy by pursuing forward-looking opportunities post-oil. And I really encourage you to go to one of these sites and check out the report, aknexteconomy.com. For decades, a question for many of us has been, if not oil and gas, what? How can we diversify Alaska's economy and lessen our reliance on unstable, volatile, and, as it turns out, climate-wrecking oil and gas? This report lays out a vision for an alternative path for Alaska, one that will enable Alaskans to prosper, find meaningful work and good-paying jobs, and take care of our lands and waters. That's what we mean by regenerative, an approach that builds community wealth and individual wealth in ways that improve ecological and social well-being. In our ACA Regenerative Working Group, we've been exploring for the last year what this new economy could be and how to make it happen. And in the report, we've outlined some of the key sectors that can serve as the basis for Alaska's next economy. So in this brief document, Thriving Alaska, we've tried to succinctly summarize the key points and issues, the benefits of these pursuing these opportunities, and what actions are needed. Next slide. Thank you. Just to cover quickly a few of the key strategies, we need to accelerate the transition away from fossil fuels to renewable energy. Why? Well, there are a lot of good reasons that we need to do that. A study that we did this spring found that we could create 67,000 new jobs by converting to 100% renewable energy by 2050. This would lower energy costs for families and businesses, improve our health, help achieve energy independence and security, and stabilize the climate for future generations. And that is one of the things we're very concerned about. The climate is code red. Alaska must do its part. We have huge challenges from climate change. The recent devastating storm in Western Alaska, the landslides near Seward and in Southeast, the thawing permafrost around the state, coastal erosion, the effects on our fish and marine mammals, all of these are wake-up calls to action. To keep the planet livable for future generations, we have to move off fossil fuels, and that means phasing out both our use and our production. Some of the other key sectors we can pursue to help build a regenerative economy are to expand broadband access, and this would greatly enhance entrepreneurial activities around the state by opening up new pathways for people. We also need to reimagine tourism and outdoor recreation with coordinated planning, infrastructure investments, and a shift to independent, ecological, and cultural-based tourism. We can develop mariculture and agriculture. We can produce green hydrogen. One of the issues I work on is decarbonizing shipping. And there's a strong case to be made to the federal government to help jumpstart green hydrogen bunkering in the Aleutians, as it would leverage the favorable geography, significant latent demand, and untapped renewable energy potential. One of our speakers, Dan Rutherford, is going to be discussing the potential for green hydrogen-based fuels in just a few minutes. And finally, we need to focus on education and workforce development. Our workforce is changing. Tomorrow's work is going to look different than it does today. More remote work, more service and information economy focused work, and a shift toward renewable energy. So Alaska needs a comprehensive, cohesive workforce development system to support early stage skill development, rapid reskilling to meet new opportunities, help navigating the transitions, and lifelong learning opportunities. Other speakers that are with us today will discuss where we are and what's needed to take advantage of these promising opportunities. So that's a brief recap of what we've been working on and what you can find in our report. And I'll turn it back to Erin.
Thank you, Kay. Always on point, as usual. I just want to repeat one thing that Kay said, though. That's 67,000 new jobs. Those numbers are a game changer for a state our population, These are good paying jobs. It is a win-win for Alaska. So that being said, I'm excited to introduce a number of exceptional panelists joining us today to speak on their vision for Alaska's next economy. Firstly, I'd like to introduce Penny Gage. She's the Managing Director at Launch Alaska.
Hi, everyone. I do have a couple slides here that I understand might be shared. If not, I can share them on my end also. But firstly, I'll introduce myself. My name is Penny Gage. I'm calling in today from Denina Lands in Anchorage, where I've lived for 8 years, but I grew up in Sitka and Pelican in Southeast Alaska, and my mother's family is Tlingit. I'm a member of the, oh, there we go, Sitka Tribe of Alaska. Proud UAF graduate from our state university system. And I have lived outside of the country, outside of the state. I've worked in Juneau in the legislature and had that interesting lens, and also in Washington, D.C. But I'm thrilled to be working to accelerate the resource revolution, is what we call it at Launch Alaska, helping propel Alaska toward a lower carbon future. And so I love events like this because an Alaska population that is informed is more likely to vote and align our elected officials and policies with our priorities. So speaking of informed, I want to start with a question. How many of you, you can put this in the chat or just think about it internally, know the source of energy for the electricity you're using right now? As a baseline, this is a good thing to be aware of when you start the conversation about renewable energy. I don't see anyone hopping in the chat. 100% hydro in Sitka. Yes, Matt, we have natural gas. Kay, yep, Tim on my team. He knows the answer. But yes, about 80% in the rail belt, the 5 utilities on the road system, the main urban utilities, is fossil fuel generation, mostly natural gas, and about 20% is renewable, almost entirely hydro with a bit of wind, biogas, and solar. And as some of you might have seen in the news, Hillcorp, the natural gas supplier for utilities on the rail belt, has said, don't count on us for future natural gas contracts. So the imperative to integrate new energy sources into our grid is real, and we know that the economics make sense. And if you live in Southeast Alaska, it's largely hydro with some backup diesel. If you live in rural communities, largely diesel with some renewables, largely wind. So we have some success stories already of the integration of renewable energy into our electricity system, but there's so much work left to do. And Alaska has huge renewable energy potential and the potential to play an important role in the field of climate tech overall. And we know that climate change is a challenge in our communities, and we see the direction the world is going. It's not just a climate imperative, but it's a tremendous economic opportunity that we think Alaska needs to be at the forefront of. So I work at Launch Alaska. We're a nonprofit organization based in Anchorage. We are an accelerator. So we focus on the deployment of climate technologies. We work with some of the world's brightest entrepreneurs, startup companies, to mitigate some of the worst effects of climate change and to help them do business here in Alaska. So our mission is to accelerate the resource revolution by deploying game-changing technologies. And we want Alaska to play a leading role in this work. And we see incredible optimism and opportunity in the future of our planet and people. Next slide. We have an ambitious goal of $1 billion, supporting the deployment of $1 billion in climate tech projects by 2030. We know that the tech is ready to go. We also see that the dollars are there. The investment dollars are available. And what often stands in the way, which is pertinent for today's conversation, is the policy and regulation. And so that's why I'm really excited that you all are informing yourselves and care about these issues as we prepare to vote in November. You can skip this slide. I hid that one in my, there we go. So we focus on 3 verticals here, 3 sectors, the 3 largest emitters of greenhouse gas emissions in Alaska. And we focus on electrifying and decarbonizing these 3 areas: energy, transportation, and industry. So the companies that we work with focus in these areas. And then we have a portfolio of 28 companies spanning everything from grid management software to solar PV, to tidal energy, to electric aircraft. And that's my last slide. You can stop the share, but as a 501c3, we're not going to tell you how to vote, but we will share with you what, as an organization, we care about as folks who work in this every day. We want state leadership that sees the future economy of our state and positions us to compete and be prepared for this work. We're really good at oil and gas tax credits, or we're really good at permitting in those sectors. How can we transition that to renewable energy? We're really excited about the future potential of green hydrogen and increased renewable energy integration into the grid. And there's such an opportunity with increased federal funding for these projects in the recently passed bipartisan infrastructure law and the Inflation Reduction Act. And I'm really looking forward to hearing from Dan Rutherford, another speaker today, on the topic of green hydrogen specifically. We're excited about what a renewable portfolio standard would do for the rail belt in Alaska. We would join over 30 US states by creating that binding goal for renewable energy on the rail belt. And it's also really important to look at the workforce for these careers of the future, as Kay mentioned, not just in renewable energy, but also overall in the information economy. And we're paying close attention to the deployment of federal funds in the state and how this can be done equitably, and how the state of Alaska can really capitalize on these once-in-a-lifetime opportunities. And I'll leave it there. I know we're each given just a few minutes, but overall, we think Alaska has tremendous potential to play a role in this resource revolution, as we call it, and to lead the transition. And we hope that our elected officials know that and have a vision. So that's something I would encourage you as a voter. Look at the websites of candidates running in your districts. What do they say about renewable energy? What do they say about the future economy of Alaska? How does that align with your vision and your hopes and dreams? So from the folks who represent us in Washington, D.C., to the Alaska legislature in Juneau, to your local assemblies or community councils or tribal governments, this all really matters. And looking forward to the discussion today. Good night, Chish, for inviting me to speak.
Thank you, Penny. Educated voters are more likely to vote. You are speaking my language. What a thoughtful and hopeful vision for our future. And the potential is kind of mind-blowing, right? So I think everybody should stop what they're doing and go to the Launch Alaska website, like them on social media, get involved in the future of Alaska now, because we're in this together. And like she said, the dollars are there. Hashtag resource revolution. Okay, our next amazing speaker is going to enlighten us about green hydrogen. Dan Rutherford is the program director at the International Council on Clean Transportation.
Great, Erin. Thanks for the kind introduction, and nice to be with everyone. I'm a little bit of the odd man out, I would say. I'm usually based in California. I'm currently on a business trip to Washington, D.C. So unfortunately, I can't report whose native lands I'm dialing in from. But you might ask a simple question: why is an environmental engineer from California interested in hydrogen production in Alaska? It's an interesting story. Kay, who I work with quite a bit on shipping issues, mentioned kind of the idea of moving towards a post-oil economy for Alaska. We are very focused on supporting a shift towards low and zero carbon fuels for the shipping sector. And my organization is the International Council on Clean Transportation. We're a research-based environmental nonprofit that works directly with government regulators worldwide to set better emission standards for vehicles and fuels. So we've been looking at hydrogen as a potential energy source for trans-Pacific shipping for about 2 years. What you should know about hydrogen is it's a great fuel on environmental grounds because it contains no carbon, therefore emits no carbon dioxide when burned, and therefore doesn't directly drive climate change. But it can be generated easily from renewable sources of electricity like solar, wind, hydro, and geothermal. But it's a relatively low energy density fuel. So what that means is if as ships move from heavy fuel oil, which provides very, very long operational ranges, to other low carbon fuels, be it methanol, ammonia, or hydrogen itself, it will imply changes in operations, and in particular, potentially more refueling stops on routes across the Pacific. So we first picked this up a couple years back. We started analyzing potential shipping between ports in China and ports in California, and we concluded that if hydrogen is adopted as a shipping fuel, about half of the container ships operating between Asia and California could operate the full length of the trip without any refueling stops. However, about half of the ships would need to add an additional port stop to refuel on the lower energy density hydrogen. So it got us interested in really doing a deep dive looking at Alaska. So we did. We released a report in June. It's on our website. It's called Potential Hydrogen Demand at Aleutian Island Ports. And we really did a deep dive where we looked at what the potential market size is for green hydrogen at the port of Dutch Harbor and also the legacy ADAC naval base. And it's a really interesting and positive story. You can see on a great circle distance path, those two ports are really directly right smack in the middle between Japan and California. And it provides a potential for a lot of new business for fuel production and port visits if Alaska does shift towards green hydrogen production. Next slide. I only have a couple minutes here, so I can't get into the nitty-gritty of the report, but what we did is we analyzed potential market size for green hydrogen at these two ports under 3 scenarios. The first scenario we called latent demand, and that's basically fuel that can be sold if the local fishing vessels were converted to hydrogen with fuel cells. That demand would be about 10,000 tons of liquid hydrogen per year. And then we looked at 2 advanced scenarios where ocean-going vessels start to divert to Dutch Harbor and or ADAC for their refueling needs. And there we see much larger potential demand on the order of 250,000 to almost 400,000 tons of liquid hydrogen per year. So that's a huge market. It doesn't exist today because ships are burning fossil fuels and they fuel either in Singapore or Long Beach, and sometimes they fuel as infrequently as every 90 days. But this is a completely new market that could be created using renewable electricity, low carbon fuel, and new business for Alaska. Next slide. By all means, the link to the report is in the chat, so please give it a look. But I mean, our main conclusions was that Alaska is strategically located to capture up to $1 billion annual market for shipping hydrogen if it succeeds as a marine fuel. We could de-risk investments in green hydrogen by first repowering the existing fishing vessel fleet in the Aleutians to use hydrogen along with fuel cells. The trick is we would need substantial federal and even state investment to build this market. You need to repower the existing ships. You need to develop the infrastructure to produce the fuels. The ports themselves would need to be converted to deep sea ports in order to start to service these diverted ships. So it's not a done deal. We think there's a lot of economic potential, but we will require substantial investments in order to tap that market. So that's all from me. Thank you.
Dan, thank you. Okay, I'll admit it. I didn't think anybody could make green hydrogen interesting, but you did. It was an intriguing presentation, and I have so many questions. I gotta say it again, hashtag resource revolution. And it started with the folks like, the work that you guys are doing. So that is, that's just so amazing. So moving on, we have Ryan Witten. Ryan is the executive director at AKV3 or Alaska version 3. Ryan, take it away.
Sounds great. Thanks, Erin. What a fantastic set of co-hosts that we have. I just want to give a quick shout out to Erin and Kay for facilitating this conversation. Thanks for the energy that you bring to everything that you do. It's appreciated. So I'm going to keep it short. I'm going to keep it brief today. I didn't come with a set of slide decks, but I just want to point out the comments that you're hearing from the other presenters. We're looking at the potential of a rapid transformation of the economy of our state. We have a huge opportunity in front of us as a state. How are we going to help to get people ready for those jobs? How are we going to support Alaskans to be able to fill those roles? We have a pretty robust workforce development system in Alaska, and we have an opportunity to increase coordination and cohesion within that workforce development system. So I'm really excited about the opportunities that sit in front of us as a state. And I think that there's a lot that we could and should be doing, and hopefully will be doing, with the support of the folks that are stepping into office. I think we have a lot of untapped potential. And I think that that's going to be really important as we start to look at those 67,000 new jobs that are going to become available. You know, right now we have as a state one of the highest rates of youth disconnection. We have 18.7% of our youth 16 to 24 who are not engaged in education or in the workforce. I think that we could do a little bit more work to get those folks engaged. I think another huge opportunity that we have is for us to look at second chance hires, folks who are coming out of our correctional system. You know, these are folks that have skills and have a lot of potential, but we need some larger systemic changes so that there's reduced risk on the hands of the employers so that they feel comfortable hiring those individuals. And lastly, I think that we need to look at our relationship with work and what that looks like as individuals. You know, as we went through that, the last several years of pandemic, however many years that's been, way too long. As we look at how that has shifted the nature of work, we've spent a lot of time working from home and not showing up in the same office. And we've seen that we can do that and do that successfully. And what that also hints to is the potential for remote work, which is something as we see increased broadband deployment throughout the state, we have a lot of potential to tap into the neurodiversity that we have throughout our state, the different cultural strengths that we have throughout our state, and to highlight that and engage in a global economy. So I'm really excited about the potential, and I'm really excited for the systemic change that we could see within our state, and I believe that we will see. So thank you for showing up. Thank you for getting engaged, and please continue to engage as we go through this November's election cycle.
Spectacular. Thank you, Ryan. It's so interesting to see how all of these issues interconnect: climate, health, renewable energy, workforce development, diversity. It's all connected. Ryan's another partner of mine getting in some good trouble. So thank you, Ryan, for everything that you do and are continuing to do for the community. You're amazing. And I would like to introduce, last but certainly not least, the illustrious Lee Hart.
Well, thank you. I'm Lee Hart, and I am calling in from Juneau, home of the traditional lands of the Tlingit, Haida, and Tsimshian peoples. I live, work, and play in Haines, also formerly known as Deshu, and same tribal affiliations. And I am the founding and executive director of the Alaska Outdoor Alliance. The Alaska Outdoor Alliance is dedicated to strengthening Alaska's $3.2 billion outdoor recreation sector. And to give you an idea of how that number comes about, I want you to imagine all the things that you do outside. And then I want you to imagine your closet or your garage or where all those things live. And then I want you to start adding that up. And then when you go out with friends, add that up some more. And you can see how that adds up to $3.2 billion with a B. So that's what our sector is about. We're about also doing so in with equity and inclusivity forward and regenerative principles, values as well. So on the regenerative tourism front and regenerative outdoors, regenerative economies in general, I would point out that we, Alaska Outdoor Alliance, was part of a grant coalition that included the Alaska Native Heritage Center SSP's Regenerative Catalyst Program, University of Alaska, and Alaska Travel Industry Association. We envisioned a post-pandemic tourism economy in this state that would be a global leader in regenerative tourism. We didn't get the big fat federal grant that we were applying for, so we're going to have to pick away at it slowly and more methodically, but we're still dedicated to it. And to that end, I hold 2 events a year. One is a legislative fly-in in the spring, and the other one is a industry conference in the fall called Confluence. And so this year's theme, it was held in Haines, and the theme was regenerative economies. This attracted a lot of attention. I think there's so much interest in talking about a regenerative economic future for Alaska. So we had Senator Murkowski came in person, Raina Thiel, who's the head of the Alaska kind of connection to the Department of Interior, Julia Nilika from USDA Rural Development, and lots of leaders from cultural, outdoor, economic development, and I'm forgetting one, sectors came to participate with us and talk about these things. We also had a third of this year's participants were from the Yukon, which is similarly interested in a regenerative tourism future. So some of the things that you should take encouragement from in the ways in which outdoor recreation can be part of a different kind of economy, in the future for Alaska, is money coming down from the federal government right now. So one of those things is the bipartisan infrastructure law, which has money in it for active transportation or making our streets more bike and pedestrian friendly, those connections to everyday places and close to home recreation. In Southeast, there's the sustainable the Southeast Alaska Sustainability Strategy, where the Biden administration allocated $25 million to transitioning the Tongass from an extractive industry to what comes next. And certainly outdoor recreation and tourism is a big piece of that. And so when you think about outdoor recreation, I'm not talking about, oh, let's just get more people kayaking, skiing, and riding bikes. It's that we are the canvas. We are, our trails, hut systems, and boat launches and other ways to access the outdoors, and our infrastructure is the canvas upon which businesses can be developed, guiding and outfitting services primarily, but even in the indigenous world, maybe it's foraging tours or trailheads for parking for popular destinations for all manner of sports. But and so then some of the other money we're getting into the sector is the Great American Outdoors Act, which was passed by a bipartisan majority in Congress. And that brings more money to the Land and Water Conservation Fund, which basically helps double community investment in outdoor recreation infrastructure. The Recreation Trails Project Grant, which has a 90-10 match or something for motorized, non-motorized, and diverse recreation. So lots of good things going on. And again, outdoor recreation is a bipartisan issue that tends to get lots of support. And that's important to keeping the money flowing. In tourism, when we talk about regenerative tourism, it's diversifying the existing tourism product. And we are defining regenerative as that conscientious and more culturally based experience that so many travelers, there's tons of market research all over the country that so many travelers are seeking. And different than sustainable travel. Sustainable travel is like, how do you keep a place the same? Regenerative is like, how do you improve it? What makes it, how can you leave a place better than you found it? And again, so with this intersection of outdoors and tourism, outdoors being the canvas, our infrastructure being the canvas upon which to build businesses. When you talk about climate, we talk about building resilient infrastructure that is, our trails and stuff as isostatic rebound in Southeast, or, tide, the changing sea levels and stuff. So resilient infrastructure. When you talk about broadband helps our adventurers safer when they're deep in the backcountry. It supports healthy, our infrastructure can support healthy ecosystems like we talk about when we talk about mariculture development, which got a huge grant down here in Southeast. Well, it's actually statewide, but it's based in Southeast. And workforce development, we're all talking about workforce development, all the jobs and all that kind of stuff. But we, and a lot of people confuse, outdoor recreation is just like low paying jobs. Well, that's our entry level. Today's kayaking guides become tomorrow's business owners, or they become tomorrow's biologists. They come, they're public land managers, whatever. So there's a whole career track that's involved that tends to get overlooked. And then on the manufacturing side, we have user-inspired innovation, some amazing developments in Alaska products and services that are really inspired by the Alaska environment. So we're the birthplace of pack rafting. We're the birthplace of fat biking. We have entrepreneurs like Alaska Tent and Tarp in the Arctic Oven Tents, Heather's Choice, and so all these Alaska-based things, there is so much in our world to be excited about and contribute to the next economy. So thanks for listening, and yeah.
I love that enthusiasm. Yay. Tourism is a big part of our economic development, no doubt. Making sure that it dovetails with the regenerative model is imperative to Alaska's continued growth, I think. And the money is there. We just need to get out the vote so we can make sure that the funds flowing into the state from the Inflation Reduction Act and the infrastructure bill go toward building a regenerative economy. So thank you so much, Lee, for your stewardship. Your vision is the kind of leadership Alaska was built on, and it's under your tutelage that we will continue to thrive. So thank you. I want to hold deep gratitude for all of these industry leaders who have gifted their time to share time with us today. So now we flip to watching two inspiring short films to tie in broadband and mariculture into this conversation. These films are part of the Just Transition in Action, an Alaskan film series, which was produced by the Just Transition Collective and the Alaska Climate Alliance and premiered at the Just Transition Summit this year. I was there. This film features the Native Conservancy Kelp Ocean Farmer Program, which currently serves native villages in Prince William Sound, Kodiak, and Southeast Alaska. I'll let the film speak for itself.
Being on the ocean at this time, with actually having restoration in mind, changes how you think about your work. With the Native Conservancy, I wanted to focus on solutions where we actually engage in our subsistence way of life, and we grow things on the land and in the water. Because a dear friend of mine, Dr. Elizabeth Hoover, wrote an article entitled, "How Can You Call Yourself Sovereign If You Can't Feed Yourself?" And I read that and I said, oh my God, doesn't that just say it all? We have to have food systems in place. We have to have programs for food security and food sovereignty. And a lot of people take for granted this incredible way of life that we have. Like on the Copper River Delta, yes, it is roadless, it is wild. We do have a lot of Alaska's iconic wildlife that we subsist on, but we have to be out there and enjoying and engaging in that subsistence way of life. That's more than a way of life, it is life. The thing that's exciting about this kelp and mariculture industry is that it's going to help the ocean. It's going to help restore, mitigate, create conservation, create habitat, and actually help restore habitat that's been impacted, in our case, by the Exxon Valdez oil spill. What people are witnessing, not only in Alaska, but around America and around the world, is a modern day land claims on our ocean. And when I first started studying and seeing what was happening with the kelp, as exciting as it was, I felt like who kelps does matter. Who farms in the ocean does matter. And the reason I say that is because the indigenous peoples who have been the original guardians and stewards for thousands of years are the ones who should be farming. They should be the ones who receive the permits in front of their villages.
Being involved in getting, these kelp farms going, and we could establish a few of them within the Cake area would be great for our community and put a little bit of folks to work and feed our people, as well too.
I feel that we need to be taking the last of our finite resources and actually using them to make the best, longest lasting products that we possibly can, and not making idling energy that we're burning. Let's figure out how to live on the planet differently. And so I feel like what we're doing with kelp, just one of 1,000 global solutions that needs to be not only funded but implemented. If we can figure out how to address how we're going to survive on this planet, then it's not about world wars and migration beyond belief. It's about restoring and bringing back and regenerating that land and that ocean and that way of life that has sustained us for thousands of years. It's not going to happen because we're lucky. It's going to happen because we care and we actually do something about it. Yep.
Wow, that was such a powerful visual and audio representation from Dune and Lloyd. It was wonderful to be transported to where and how they're kelp farming. I love that the film started by focusing on the solution. If we could all put the collective first and focus on solutions, not 100% of the time, come on, look at me, I'm a realist, but if we could put our neighbors first 20, 30, 40, 50% of the time, where would we be then? What could we do? We need to learn from our indigenous sisters and brothers and learn how to live on the planet differently. Like the gentleman said in the movie, once again, I'm gonna say it, #resource revolution. So now we're gonna move right along to our video on the Yukon Kuskokwim Delta Tribal Broadband Consortium.
I really have good memories of being out in the wilderness and growing up, and to retain our languages, our cultures, our hunting and fishing rights, and to retain it in perpetuity forever. And that is my hope. We have hooked up 101 homes here in Akiak, and they have high-speed internet right now.
I think it's very important that when we bring broadband to the community, that we own that broadband and that it's our solution that's being put in place, not someone else's solution. We're not buying into someone else's, corporate interest. What's nice about broadband is, you can hire local native community for broadband technician positions, either climbing a tower or installing routers in homes, wiring in people's homes. So it lends itself to a whole nother job that is not currently available to them for them today.
When I started learning about broadband and what it could do for our people, I was like, oh my gosh, this is the vehicle that has all of our solutions that we can drive. Broadband is going to be the significant tool and lifestyle that helps Indigenous people return to our values in a significant way that maybe hasn't been offered before because it applies to everything.
Our solution for our tribes in Southwest Alaska is to use low Earth orbit satellite as the initial broadband because it's fast, we can get it up and running very quickly. We build a tower in each village where we can broadcast that to every single home and every single business in our community.
Our Native corporations, our nonprofits need to support the tribal governments to strengthen our tribes throughout the state. 229 strong tribes, they need to stand up and protect their way of life. Our goal in direction of our elders to take control of our lives back and to exercise our sovereignty so we don't depend on nobody, to have that government-to-government relationship with the federal government and to protect our way of life.
We are the first low Earth orbit satellite community in the world, nowhere else. So it's not just moving forward and progress that are being made and led by Native people, but it's groundbreaking progress. New emerging technologies being used for the first time in tribal communities. And that's where Akiak Native community and our broadband work there has really transformed that part of Southwest Alaska. It's not only possible, it's working, and it's being led by Indigenous people.
"17 tribes have joined the Yukon-Kuskokwim Delta Tribal Broadband Consortium and are on their way to receiving tribally owned broadband for the first time. At this moment, only 60% of the state is reliably connected. In rural communities, low-speed internet can cost more than $300 per month. Fortunately, Alaska has an immediate opportunity to expand broadband access with funding for broadband and, in the Federal Infrastructure and Investment Jobs Act. The disparity between rural and urban connectivity is an economic justice issue, plain and simple. The solution is staring us in the face. We just need to listen to the people. So let's elect people that will listen and put the climate crisis at the forefront of their agenda. Groundbreaking projects in a small little village in Alaska, led by Indigenous people. We need more of that. So we do have a little bit of time here for some questions for our speakers, and Kay is going to go ahead and moderate the Q&A session, working with questions left for us in the chat. Kay, what you got?
Well, maybe I've missed something, but I'm not seeing any questions in the chat. And what I would say is, if you've got a question and you don't want to ask it right now, we'd be happy to connect with you after this webinar. And in a moment, Haley's going to provide some information about a survey that you could take to get connected with our group. So please, if you've got questions now, we've got a moment for it. But if not, we can move on to the conclusion of our, I see someone, Lynn Franks has her hand raised. Can we unmute Lynn for a question?
Yeah, I just would like an example of what the ecotourism looks like when you have a bunch of folks that you see you're a canvas for it all. Could Lee, could you elaborate a little bit, give an example of what that looks like in real life when we have tourists here? Thank you.
Yeah, Lynn, thanks for that question. I think what it looks like is development out of tourism products and services that are infused with indigenous wisdom and values. So in some communities, they have been, I hope this answers your question, that they have been a bit left behind. It could be things as simple as, one example would be wayfinding signage and interpretation. So a lot of our interpretation on the trails and whatnot, where it exists, is based on post contact and especially gold rush era stories from our state. Converting to more of the history of the people that have been stewarding this for millennia. And an example of that is in Anchorage, where Anchorage Park Foundation worked with Eklutna Tribe and Alaska Native Heritage Center to do some wayfinding signage that's really based in Eklutna tribal stories. The thing they came up with was a bowl kind of graphic design for a trail marker, and again, interpretive signage. And it was a collaboration between, as I mentioned, Anchorage Park Foundation, Eklutna, and Alaska Native Heritage Center to really tell the stories of this land and waters in a bit different way. If that didn't answer your question, ask again, but.
I appreciate that. Here's a question for Dan Rutherford. Could you say a little bit more about the different types of hydrogen for people who aren't familiar? What's green hydrogen and blue hydrogen? A question for you about that.
Right. The whole rainbow of hydrogen question. There's actually tremendous diversity, and not just on the ways it's produced, which those are generally expressed as colors, but the way that it's stored. So either in a compressed form or in a liquid form, but kind of focusing on the colors themselves. Hydrogen itself is an energy carrier. It's not an energy resource. It's not something you dig out of the ground, for example. So you have to produce it from some other energy source. And depending upon what the feedstock is, it will have different life cycle emissions implications. So for example, if you were to take, and you can do this, you can take coal, which is very carbon intensive. You can extract basically the hydrogen from it and the energy from it, and then sell that as its own fuel. That actually would be worse for the climate than the coal itself, because you're losing energy in the conversion process. So that's the extreme case. I think we would call that black hydrogen. Gray hydrogen would be hydrogen that is produced from reforming natural gas. That's actually the most common type of hydrogen today. Overwhelming majority is produced from natural gas. And there's a lot of other ones. The two I'll highlight here is blue hydrogen. That would be produced from some sort of fossil fuel where you capture the carbon in the process and you store it underground. And there's interest in blue hydrogen as sort of a transition fuel to the future, which most people agree is green hydrogen. And that's kind of the silver bullet, right? That's the hydrogen you produce purely from renewable power. You could be using, as I mentioned, solar, wind, geothermal, tidal, etc. And that will have the best environmental performance and also best tap the vast renewable energy potential of the state of Alaska.
Great, thank you, Dan. Well, I think considering the time, we will move on and do the conclusion here of our program. Again, thank you all so much for being with us. We have a few short calls to action for you now. So I'd call on Erin.
Well, thank you, Kay. Thank you so much for being here, and thank you for your continued leadership. I really do appreciate it. I just have a few calls to action. I have to encourage everyone to elect leaders that are climate champions. There are so many different things to do, so many different activities that you can get involved in. If you aren't registered, do so. If you're registered to vote, vote. If you vote, then support an issue with more than just words. This is our home. We chose this beautiful land for a reason, all of them different but equally valid. Voting is the most important thing that you can do in the next 60 days to affect climate change, honestly. We must have leaders that not only acknowledge change, but take concrete action to stop its deleterious effects. One of the ways you can look into the questions of is to look at the question of the Constitutional Convention. Take the time to look at this issue. And if you care about land rights and our right to privacy, voting no is the only way to protect our Constitution. There are a couple of campaigns to watch. Watch the Renewable Energy Fund extension, watch the Renewable Portfolio Standard, and watch the Green Bank. Join our economic vision coalition. Stay in touch. I believe Kay has some more information to share.
Yeah, I want to briefly recognize Matt Jackson, who's the Climate and Energy Coordinator for SEAC, the Southeast Alaska Conservation Council. He's also on the coordinating team for the Alaska Climate Alliance. And he's been shepherding our conversation about potential action that we might take collectively in the coming months and as the new legislature convenes. Matt?
Thanks so much for that introduction, Kay. And this has been an excellent webinar to be a part of. I learned a lot. And Erin and others have referred to the Renewable Portfolio Standard several times throughout this webinar. But these are three very achievable policies: the Renewable Energy Fund, the Renewable Portfolio Standard, the Green Bank, that could be enacted this very legislative session in 2023. And they're very achievable, and they're really important first steps towards developing this regenerative economy that we're talking about. Without renewable energy in our rural communities, without renewable energy on the rail belt, without financing for these new technologies that a green bank can provide, we're not going to be able to grow this regenerative economy as quickly as we need to, because as we've seen from Typhoon Merbok and Hurricane Ian and all of the other climate chaos, it's urgent. We need to get started now. And so thank you, Brandon, for dropping a link about how to get involved in the Alaska Climate Alliance. If you fill out the form on the other end of that link, you will be included in our campaign planning and our campaign email list as we work together to make sure that the best possible versions of these three policies, the Renewable Energy Fund extension, enacting a renewable portfolio standard, and establishing a green bank in Alaska, are passed into law this coming legislative session. So hope to see you in a Alaska Climate Alliance space soon.
Thank you, Matt. And we're going to have a few words now from Haley Reed, who's recently joined our group, and she's the coordinator for our regenerative working group, Regenerative Economies Working Group. Haley?
Thanks, Kay. I just want to briefly say, we've covered a lot of topics today, and it just reflects how diverse our economy is. And it takes many different types of people, organizations, industries, to understand what steps are being taken right now and how working together could amplify those impacts of those steps and to plan for the future. So I'm in the forming stage of an economic vision coalition. And the goal of this coalition is to bring together that variety of stakeholders and industry leaders across the state to just have a table for this conversation. So if you're interested in joining this coalition, or you just want to hear more about what it's about, please fill out the survey I just dropped in the chat, and would be really happy to continue this conversation of what your vision is for Alaska's future economy and who else could benefit from talking about this. So thank you.
Thanks, Haley. And Erin's going to wrap us up.
Well, an economic vision coalition, I think that's perfect. I think that's perfect for what we want to see for our future. We want to thank everybody for their participation. To get connected, feel free to check out www.nexteconomy.com, email regenerate@fbxclimateaction.org, or fill out the survey in the chat. Follow all of the organizations that participated in this video on social media. We must let everyone know what a regenerative model is, that it's not only good for the economy, but it's imperative for the continued existence of our planet. Alaska should be leading the nation. Help us do that. Thank you so kindly for your time.